For centuries, man has observed mysterious lights and other strange apparitions in the sky, and, in some instances, left detailed accounts to record the phenomenon. But what were the citizens of Basel in Switzerland observing during July and August of 1556 to prompt this illustration? And what are we to make of this wood carving, of mysterious objects seen by hundreds of witnesses over Nuremberg on the 4th of April 1561? And on the 4th of July 1554, the French chronicler Simon Joulard wrote this detailed account of something extraordinary seen in the skies overhead. There appeared in the air, about 10 p.m, in the region known as the High Palatinate of the Rhine, towards the Bohemian forest, two men in full armour, one considerably taller than the other, having on his belly a bright shining star, and a flaming sword in his hand, as also had the smaller one. They began a violent fight, at the end of which the smaller one was beaten down and could not move, whereupon a chair was brought for the victor, on which he sat, and never ceased to threaten with the sword he held in his hand, the one who was lying at his feet, as if at any moment he would strike him. Finally, the two of them disappeared. It's doubtful whether celestial objects, such as stars or planets, could have given rise to such a detailed account. But while the likely origin and makeup of these early examples of strange aerial phenomena may never be known, the mysterious spheres which visited Basel and Nuremberg in the 16th century were destined to pay a return visit to Europe almost 400 years later. They remain one of the great unsolved mysteries of the Second World War. Foo Fighters, named after a comic book character and often described as highly manoeuvrable glowing balls of light, were seen and reported by pilots not just in the European theatre of war, but throughout the Pacific. Both Allied and Axis flyers saw them, each believing they were some form of secret weapon. But Foo Fighters didn't act like weapons, they acted like observers, sometimes running harmlessly alongside a warplane for many miles, before suddenly departing at high speed. And, for many of the pilots who saw these strange glowing objects, it did not seem possible that the Foo Fighters were a human creation. The day after the Japanese raid on Pearl Harbor, Yoshio Takita reported the following observation. It was on a clear day on December the 8th, 1941. There were clouds, but we could see the blue sky clearly. About 10 of us, Red Cross volunteer first aiders, were lying on the school lawn during the noon hours. We could still see the smoke rising from Pearl Harbor in bellowing clouds, and one of us noticed a round white object, floating way up in the sky overhead. It was very high, over 20,000 feet. We watched it go by, just like a ball floating downstream. We thought it was another planet, or something from Mars, spying on the great smoke rising from Pearl Harbor, wrote Takita. But it wasn't just the odd Foo Fighter that was observed in both theatres of war. Stephen J. Brickner, a sergeant with the 1st Marine Division, reported, "The sighting occurred on August the 12th, 1942, about 10 in the morning, while I was in a bivouac with my squad on the island of Tulagi in the southern Solomons, west of Guadalcanal. It was a bright tropical morning, with high banks of white fleecy clouds. I was cleaning my rifle on the edge of my foxhole when suddenly the air raid warning sounded. There had been no condition red. I immediately slid into my foxhole, with my back to the ground and my face turned up to the sky. I heard the formation before I saw it. Even then, I was puzzled by the sound. It was a mighty roar that seemed to echo in the heavens. It didn't sound at all like the high-pitched sewing machine drone of the Jap formations. A few seconds later, I saw the formation of silvery objects directly overhead. They were flying very high above the clouds, too high for a bombing run on our little island. Someone shouted in a nearby foxhole that they were Jap planes, searching for our fleet. I accepted this explanation, but with a few reservations. First, the formation was huge. I would say over 150 objects were in it. Instead of the usual V formation of 25 planes, this one was in straight lines of 10 or 12 objects, one behind the other. The speed was a little faster than Jap planes, and they were soon out of sight. A few other things puzzled me. I couldn't seem to make out wings or tails. They seemed to wobble slightly, and every time they wobbled, they would shimmer brightly from the sun. Their colour was like highly polished silver. No bombs were dropped, of course. All in all, it was the most awe-inspiring spectacle I have seen in my life. On the 15th of August 1950, radio station owner Nicholas Mariana became the first person to produce 16mm camera film of flying saucers, as a formation of sphere-like objects flew above a local sports field at Missoula, Montana. Then, on the 2nd of July 1952, and with sightings of mysterious flying saucers reaching epidemic proportions across America, US Naval Warrant Officer Delbert C. Newhouse filmed this formation of mysterious spheres over Tremonton, Utah with his 16mm camera. After detailed examination by US naval analysts, the film was deemed not only genuine, but the objects were estimated to have travelled at speeds far in excess of known conventional aircraft. Interestingly, in their official report, the US Navy concluded, "The objects are internally illuminated spheres and are not reflecting sunlight." In the years that followed, more and more people would go on to photograph or film unidentified flying objects. Not just in America, of course, but throughout the world. As the evidence began to build that something extraordinary was visiting our skies, there were occasional glimpses of the mysterious spheres. This remarkable sequence of film was taken during the inaugural test flight of Concorde. Watch again, as the sphere descends and comes to an abrupt stop, before rising slightly to move alongside the aircraft, then rise again to disappear at speed. A piece of dust on the camera lens, or a genuine UFO. By the early 1980s, camcorders were becoming a common tool, and with that came a sudden surge in UFO footage captured on videotape. Nowhere was this more pronounced than in Mexico, where, after a spate of UFO sightings greeted the solar eclipse over that country in July 1991, the term spheres would soon become a common byword. In the midst of all this activity, a new phenomena began to emerge, and with its appearance came a new term to describe it: the fleets. These extraordinary formations of the mysterious spheres have appeared countless times over Mexico, and literally brought traffic to a standstill. The most plausible explanation is that these objects are nothing more than helium-filled balloons. But as any visitor to Mexico will tell you, the thin air renders helium-filled balloons virtually useless, as this man discovered when he tried to launch an advertising balloon in Acapulco, where the air is nothing like as thin as that found in Mexico City, which is precisely where this fleet of mysterious spheres greeted the arrival of the Pope in January 1999. Jaime Maussan is a leading television investigative journalist in Mexico and, since featuring UFOs on his Terza Millennia weekly TV show in 1991, has gone on to amass over 10,000 hours of amateur UFO footage. But 6 years ago, after this mysterious sphere-like object fell to Earth in a remote part of the country, killing a nearby cow in the process, Jaime wondered if this might be proof positive that the mysterious spheres originated from space.
1994 at 7:15 in the morning. At least 12 people saw this sphere falling from the sky and even hearing the noise it was producing. This sphere, when it fell, produced a big sound that killed a cow that was sitting less than 30 or 40 meters away from the point of the impact. The police in the area took notice of what had happened that morning. And yes, we know for sure. Something very strange is that this sphere had an impact calculated between 1,000 and 5,000 kilometers an hour, and nothing happened to it. Then that was the first mysterious thing that we observed in this sphere. From then on, there are many other questions with no answer until this moment. We have considered, and the scientists in the Mexican University, the National University, consider that probably was produced by the heat when this sphere was entering into the Earth's atmosphere. That's the only explanation we have, because some people, experts on ballistics, are wondering why the remainings in both poles go to the inside and not to the outside. And that is, again, another of those questions who haven't been solved around this sphere. NASA saw this sphere falling through radar, and they were able to go to the ranch a few weeks after of the impact. And they asked Mr. Tito Salazar for the sphere, and he didn't want to give it to them. We also know that this has an alliation of metals by titanium in 80%, vanadium in 10%, aluminum in 10%. This was analyzed again by the National University in Mexico. The interesting point here is that to make this alliation, you need very, very high temperatures. It means this is very sophisticated technology, what we have in this mysterious sphere.
Jaime wondered if this might be proof positive that the mysterious spheres originated from space. In point of fact, it did, as did this strikingly similar sphere which fell to Earth in southern Africa earlier this year. But there was no mystery here, for both spheres were later identified as spent fuel cells from decaying satellites in space.
This titanium sphere is the one that was discovered by Oliver the dog in Texas. It was used to hold pressurized gas that was used to force the fuel into the nozzle during the operation of the stage. So there are 3 other balls like this, probably in Texas, waiting to be found.
Nonetheless, far from plunging to Earth, these mysterious spheres, which appeared over Stirling, Scotland during the summer of 1998, appeared content to loiter high in the clouds. Local man Brian McPhee has filmed numerous spheres ever since, and on one occasion captured this remarkable sequence when a sphere appears to split in 2. Here's the sequence again. Now watch closely as we slow down the film. It's a real puzzle, but where does the second object vanish to? Meanwhile, several hundred miles to the south, Christopher Martin was on hand to record yet further examples of the mysterious spheres. This sequence was shot in the summer of 1998, looking out towards Canary Wharf in central London. "12 months on, and on the 29th of April 2000, Christopher captured the moment when the spheres revisited the nation's capital. After filming sphere-like objects on 3 separate occasions, this extraordinary afternoon culminated with the appearance of 2 spheres, but these appeared to be joined. Watch carefully as they proceed to pivot to and fro in one of the world's busiest air corridors. Incredibly, on the 22nd of July 2000, Christopher filmed yet again something remarkable in the skies over London. These spheres appeared to be joined by some kind of tether. But are these merely balloons, caught drifting in the wind? If so, who released them? And why, if these and other spheres filmed by Christopher are merely balloons, why were civil aviation authorities on the ground oblivious to their presence? At the very least, these would surely have presented a potential hazard to passing commercial aircraft. But if the mysterious spheres seen from the ground pose a real puzzle, what of similar anomalous sphere-like objects that have appeared in space? Just as the mysterious spheres were set to impact over Mexico, extraordinary images of sphere-like objects began to appear on transmissions beamed directly back to Earth by successive space shuttle missions. Although initially labelled as mere ice crystals or debris by NASA officials, as more and more puzzling images began to emerge of anomalous objects in space, NASA adopted a strange silence when quizzed over images such as this. This is the Mir space station, filmed from the Space Shuttle Discovery during NASA's STS-84 docking with Mir. Note how instead of placing Mir in the centre of the frame, the camera operator seems far more interested in focusing instead on these mysterious spheres. And, as the sequence continues, note how the sphere in the centre of this particular formation approaches Mir, only to stop, and then rise above and beyond the station's solar array panels. Watch again. The central sphere comes to a sudden stop and then rises. To most observers, this action is indicative of an intelligently controlled manoeuvre. Now take a look at another sequence, this time taken from NASA's STS-80 mission. Keep your eye on the centre of the screen, as a large sphere or plasma-like object emerges from a bank of cloud in the upper atmosphere. A glitch on the camera, an ice crystal. Now watch how the astronauts aboard the space shuttle appear to take more than a passing interest in the movement of 3 mysterious spheres seen in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. A simple question: why, if these were merely ice crystals, would astronauts zoom in to take a closer look at them? Here's another example of mysterious spheres seen in close proximity to the Space Shuttle, again during NASA's STS-84 mission. Keep your eye on the top left-hand corner of the screen. Is this evidence of a fleet of mysterious spheres or, as some have claimed, the aftermath of a flushed toilet? Perhaps the most intriguing footage of anomalous spheres gleaned from space came with NASA's STS-75 mission. This is the moment when NASA lost a $100 million tethered satellite. 3 days later, the astronauts came across the stranded tether and zoomed in from some 77 miles distance. The tethered cable, still attached to the satellite and measuring a remarkable 17.2 kilometers in length, can clearly be seen. But watch, something extraordinary is about to happen. If these objects are merely ice crystals or space debris close to the camera, two questions spring to mind. How is it possible for one and more of these sphere-like objects to travel behind the tether? More to the point, how, in the vacuum of space, is it possible for this debris to travel in all directions of the compass? Moreover, when the shuttle camera makes one and more repeated jogging movements, one would expect to see any debris close to the camera disappear from the field of view, but none does. More puzzling still, assuming these anomalous objects were indeed mere ice crystals or debris close to the camera, their movement in response to a rocket exhaust from the shuttle would have driven them in one particular direction, not to all points of the compass and at different speeds. It is a remarkable sequence, and the closer one studies the movement of these anomalous spheres, one can actually begin to see some change direction, as if taking deliberate steps to avoid colliding with others around. Ancient descriptions, wood carvings, tapestries, paintings and drawings, early cine footage, incredible images captured on camcorders here on Earth, and now extraordinary footage gleaned from space itself. What are the mysterious spheres? Where do they come from? Why are they here? These and other far-reaching questions have yet to be fully addressed, but the evidence for this striking phenomena is all too real, and someone, somewhere, knows the answers.